Hello and welcome to this episode of Prepped and Packed, where we will be making a really great recipe for black bean enchiladas. So we're going to start this recipe by sauteing some onions and red bell peppers and a yellow bell pepper that I have left over, just in some olive oil to get them softened up. So as you can see, I'm just going to be cutting the things into thin strips because these are going to be going into the enchiladas. So it makes sense to have them be just about the same shape as the tortillas when they're rolled up. So as you can hear, now I'm sauteing the vegetables. I'm just taking these onions and taking the skin off. And they're pretty small, so sometimes they end up being like a weird shape. But then I'm cutting them in half. I'm going to take off this weird layer. And just cutting them into slices so that the layers naturally break into smaller pieces. And I'm just eyeballing the amount of onion and peppers I'm putting in. I put in about 2.5 peppers. I'm going to put in 4 of these small onions. You can see I have these already going in the pan. I have one more onion to cut up, but these are starting to get soft. So in terms of prepping, something that you can definitely do ahead of time, at least a day, is cut up your peppers and onions, or even buy them pre-cut. And then when it's time to cook this, you can just throw them in and start sauteing them right away, and that'll save you a lot of time the night of. So in terms of spicing the enchiladas, I'm going to be using salt and pepper. Salt is important to put on early to start getting some of the water out and to help them start to caramelize. But otherwise, I'm just going to use a little bit of cumin, a little bit of garlic powder. Most of the flavor is going to come from the enchilada sauce, and that's something else that makes this easy to prep, is that there's like less spices and stuff you have to get together. Additionally, these enchiladas are going to use corn tortillas. Now, you can use either flour or corn tortillas when you're making enchiladas, but part of what makes this good for being packed the next day is the corn tortillas. So flour tortillas, if you let them sit overnight, are going to get really gummy and gross, but the corn tortillas are just going to sort of, like, I don't want to say dissolve exactly because that sounds gross, but they'll just sort of fall apart in a really pleasurable way and something closer to, like, grits, which are also made out of cornmeal. So when you reheat them the next day, they're going to be just as delicious and good as they were the night before. So these are getting pretty much where we want them. As you can see, they have some color on them. They're starting to caramelize. It's really important you do this first because that way they'll be soft enough to eat in the actual enchiladas and won't end up being just raw after you cook them. So I turned off the heat on this, and I'm going to add a bag of 2 cups of black beans. These are beans that I made ahead of time. Making beans from scratch saves you a little bit of money. Buying beans from a can is actually still pretty cheap. But I like to buy my dry beans in bulk and then portion them into these 2-cup bags. I also think 2 cups is a little bit better for 4 servings. A can is going to have 1 3/4 cup, and that 1/4 cup does really make a difference in terms of what your portion is going to be. So I'm just going to let these heat through in the residual heat, and then they'll be ready for. So what I'm going to do now is soften the tortillas over my gas burner. You can also do this in a pan if you don't have an electric stove or a glass top, but you're really just letting them sit for a few seconds before turning them over. And what this is doing, you can wait till they get a little bit more color, but what this is doing is softening them up, warming them up, and this is going to make them easier to roll in a few seconds when we fill them up. And it's also going to give them a little bit more color, which is more flavor, and then this way they won't tear as easily. So you'll find that, as I said, I used black beans and I used onions and peppers. You'll find that I did keep this pretty vegetable heavy. That's just because I think that having this vegetable forward is a way to make it really, really filling without it being as caloric. That said, I also like using black beans because I think it's easier to just dump the black beans in that are already pre-cooked. That said, if you wanted to put chicken or steak or whatever else in your enchiladas, you totally could. It would just either be a matter of having to cook that separately because it's not going to cook through in the oven, or having it prepped ahead of time. But that's totally up to you. Also, you'll want to preheat your oven to 350 for when we eventually put the enchiladas into the oven. So I've grated 4 ounces of Monterey Jack. The other 4 ounces are going to go on top. And to make sure that there's about an equal amount that goes into each enchilada, I've split it up, as you can see, into these little piles. I've also sort of done that with my enchilada mix. I've broken it into fourths, so I'll just put a third of each of one of these quarters into the tortillas. It almost never works out right. There's always one that seems very full at the end, or one that seems very empty at the end, depending on which way I've leaned, but this gets me closer than if I do nothing. So this is how I fill them. I usually start with the cheese, and I just put that along the inside. And then again, I'm just going to take about a third of this mixture. I actually use my tongs for this because it's still a little bit hot. And I put that in the center. And then you want to roll it up and put it seam side down into your baking dish. And so we'll fill up the rest of these, and then we'll do the next part. So here's what they look like now that they're all packed in. As you can see, we have a little bit of extra space over here, but that's fine. So now we're going to take our enchilada sauce and just pour it over the top. So you just want to pour it on evenly. A lot of this is actually going to evaporate. It might look really soupy now, but a lot of it's going to evaporate in the oven, so it's okay to use the whole jar. There we go. I also want to take this time to say that I used a mild enchilada sauce, but at any point in this recipe you can either add chilies or use a hotter enchilada sauce to make things spicier if that's what you prefer. But this is a great recipe in the sense that you really can control the heat. There's plenty of mild enchilada sauces that aren't hot at all. There's plenty of ones that are hot, and these are never going to taste bad with chilies in them. I just don't really like them, and they are a little bit too much for me because I am a weak person. Okay, that extra 4 ounces of cheese is on, and now we're going to put them into the oven. So I have this again preheated for 350, and we're just going to put these in here for 20 minutes until everything is nice and melted and heated through. So for serving, I'm going to serve it with a lot of fresh cilantro on top, and then I'm also going to have some lime wedges on the side. You could also always, of course, have sour cream, extra hot sauce if you wanted. Any of those things. So this recipe is currently gluten-free, assuming you use corn tortillas, and also vegetarian, but if you wanted it to be vegan, all you'd have to do is omit the cheese. You could either replace it with a vegan cheese substitute, or you could make a cashew cream. That's like cashews that you've soaked in water for many hours and then blended with a little bit of water and some spices to make it a little cheesier. Either of those options are fine, or you could just omit altogether. Let's see how this is looking. Ooh. Yes, this is exactly what you're looking for. Cheese is totally melted. The exposed parts of the tortilla are getting a little crispy. Very good. We can turn off the oven and take these bad boys. So, because there are 12 tortillas and this is 4 servings, you get 3 enchiladas each. Math! Here we are, the finished product. I've taken it outside onto my porch so you can see it in better light. So now you just have to eat and enjoy. Thank you for joining me for this edition of Prepped and Packed. I hope you like these enchiladas, and I hope that you can incorporate them into your dinner and lunch routine. Bye!